Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of What's Up with Power. My name is Justin Wagner. I'm with Team ODZ, and I'll be your host this morning as we bring in a special guest to talk about how to make progress on the bike. Feel like you're stuck in a little bit of a rut or can't quite get to that next level, we're going to have a conversation to help you understand what you can change up to push that to the next level. We've got Nate Dunn from Data Driven Athlete, awesome presenter. We always love having him here on the show. He's getting warmed up on the trainer. We'll be bringing him in here in a minute. He's doing some sprints, 15-second sprints, getting those vocal cords nice and warmed up. Okay, he's not really doing that, but it sounds fun. Well, I don't know if fun's the right word to use, but anyway, I'm done with dumb jokes, and we've got 60 seconds till the live stream. Not until the live stream starts, but until the group ride in Zwift starts. If you haven't noticed, we've got over here, we've got a group ride in Zwift going. And I'm going to send them a message right now. Let them know we are live, that they should stick with me. And I'm going to switch over to watching the feed here on my phone, do a little juggle, do a dance. Hopefully we'll get this baby started. And 30 seconds till the group ride starts. 1 second. Loaded, there we go. I can see myself on my phone. That's a good thing. So the way this is gonna work is we're gonna have 15 minutes of teaching, followed by 15 minutes of questions and answering. So I'm gonna kick off the group ride. I'm gonna toss it to Nate, who's going to do the teaching today, and then we will go from there. So let me settle into a good pace. Get Nate here on the screen. There we go. Hey, Nate. Welcome.
Good morning, Justin.
And I think with that, we got the group ride going. I'm going to go in the background and manage the Peloton while you present away.
Good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on again. And yeah, great to be back here in the new year. My name is Nate Dunn. My coaching company is Data Driven Athlete. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about how to make progress on the bike. If you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to kind of log those in the back of your mind. You can type those in the comments box. And I would love to get to anything related to this presentation or anything else that might pop up. So make sure to ask questions when we get to the end, and we'd love to cover them. So, all right, cool. Let's jump right in. So first step kind of in talking about making progress is to kind of ask this question, and that is, are you ready for progress? And, anyone that's, taken the next step in something understands that, it takes a big commitment, and it might be that where you're at in life doesn't afford the ability to make that kind of big commitment. So before we even jump into this, I think it's important to look and kind of assess where you're at in life. And on the next slide, we have a graphic here that kind of explains this, and the central column we have here is just kind of representative of your life capacity, and that is how much capacity you have in life to kind of handle all the different responsibilities. And for most of us, our primary responsibilities are comprised of kind of our work responsibilities and our family responsibilities. And when we add these up, what's left over oftentimes is what we have to kind of pursue our passion in life, which for most of us on here is cycling. So it could be that when you add up those different elements, you shake that all down and you say, you know what, right now is just really not the time to make to take that next step and to progress in cycling. Or it might be that you add those elements up and you say, hey, this is how much time I have left over, and I'm really ready to jump in and to kind of go to the next level. So if we go to the next slide, please. So one of the reasons why we bring this up is that sometimes when we're training, maybe progress isn't always the goal. It could be that you're in a period of planned detraining. So maybe you're in a period of the season where you're kind of winding things down a little bit. It could be that, life is pushing back at you a little bit, and maybe you've had some health issues, or maybe you've had some complications with your kids, or work has gotten kind of crazy, and you're kind of in this area of life where you're just trying to maintain your fitness, or maybe you're just trying to hang on to as much as you can. And on a personal note, I've been in that stage a lot over the past 5 years, where progress maybe isn't attainable at this juncture, but we're just trying to do workouts to kind of hang on to whatever we have. And that's okay too. And the fourth one, and kind of leading into where we're talking about today, is maybe you've got enough things that are lining up in life and you're ready for progress. And that's where we're going to jump off from for today. So if you've looked at, if you've talked about progress before, if you've thought about this, you might kind of come to this presentation and say, you know what, I've tried a lot before. I can't get better. I haven't been able to improve. I've tried this training plan. I've tried this, these different types of workouts, and I just really haven't been able to improve. And so I want to address maybe what some of those excuses most commonly are. And for a lot of people, they say, you know what, I'm just too old. Maybe I'm kind of past that 40-year-old, benchmark where my performance is starting to decline because of age, and I just can't get any faster. And there's a recent study that came out a couple years ago where a rider between his 101st and 103rd birthday made, I think it was on measure of maybe 14% improvement in his VO2 max, and he set the world record for kind of his age group. So undergoing a really specific training plan, he got better between 101 and 103. So when I hear something like that, I oftentimes say, you know what, age is really not an excuse for not being able to improve. So we're going to check that one off the list. The next one, I just don't have enough time. And in my experience, what this usually always means is it's not about not having enough time. It's about poor management skills, poor time management skills. And where, when you add up your day and you assess how many hours you have in your day, you're spending maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours watching Netflix in the evening. And you might say, okay, I would rather watch Netflix than improve on the bike. And then that would be okay if that's kind of where you're at. But generally, it's about kind of shifting time priorities as opposed to not having enough time, with the exception of kind of some of the earlier ones that we mentioned, in terms of life factors maybe pushing back. And sometimes those, legitimately give us restrictions on our time. But for most people, it's about priorities. The third one that we're going to jump into in a little bit more depth is sometimes people say, you know what, I'm just not very good. I've never been that good of an athlete. I've never been that guy that could just start training and get better. And to this, I would respond with another recent study that showed that there really is no such thing as this concept of a non-responder to exercise. So this idea that a lot of people have had for many years that, some people just don't respond to training is just not true. Now, it is true that some people respond better to training, or some people respond more actively to training, but the idea that some people just don't get any better with training just isn't true. And you can check out references to these different studies. We have over at our website, datadrivenathlete.com, we have a blog post titled with the same title of the presentation, and you can check out some references to these studies if you want to dig into this with a little bit more depth. So talking specifically about kind of the genetics, we go to the next slide, and we talk about this nature versus nurture continuum. And on one side of the continuum, we kind of have this argument that some of you may have read the book, The Sports Gene, which is a really popular book a couple years ago. And it kind of approaches this topic by saying that athletic performance and athletic excellence really is driven by genetic factors. And then on the other side of this kind of continuum, you have another recent book called Peak. And again, in this blog post, we have references to these different books. But on the other side of the spectrum, it says, you know what, it's really not about genetics. It's about this concept of deliberate practice, that through systematized practice over years and years and years, that's what drives excellence. So wherever the truth lies in between this continuum of genes versus deliberate practice, what we want to focus on in this process is the deliberate practice side, because that's the only thing that we can control as athletes, right? It's about how hard we work, how efficiently we work. Whatever role genetics play in our ability to progress really doesn't make that much of a difference for us. It's not something that we can control. So we're going to spend our time kind of focusing on that deliberate practice side. So next slide, please. So what is deliberate practice? So these are some of the core concepts that come from this book, and we're gonna break them out here. So the first one is that we want to study the habits of expert performers. So when we talk about designing a protocol of deliberate practice or of training, one of the best things to do is to look at the best performers in sport. Now in our sport, it gets a little bit complicated, right? Because you have doping scandals, and it gets convoluted in terms of what maybe is driving progress for some of our best athletes. But that's another topic. But for the most part, we want to look at the habits or the training habits of our best performers. The second one Deliberate practice happens outside of one's comfort zone. So if you really can't make progress if you're just simply doing the same thing. If you're just simply riding or simply doing the same workouts, that's not going to produce progress. The third one, deliberate practice has well-defined and specific goals. So we're not just simply getting on the bike and riding. While that might sometimes be, an objective of a training plan, there are specific goals and objectives that we're trying to work through. The fourth one, it requires full attention and focused effort. And then the fifth one, regular feedback and modifications to that feedback. So that's kind of where training with power comes into this equation, is that we can always kind of monitor our progress and then make adjustments to our training plan to make sure that we're still making progress. And there's a lot of different presentations that have been done on Justin's program that kind of talk about those different tools. So next slide, please. So if you're looking at all these things and you're thinking to yourself, man, this sounds like a lot of work. Yeah, it is, right? Getting better or breaking through a plateau is work. And we kind of cycle back to that, that first question, and that is maybe you're not at a place in life right now where you want to take that, take that next step. But don't let anyone fool you into thinking that there's some magic workout or some, new training app or anything that's going to help you get better. It's about working in a systematized and planned way. So we get to the next slide, please. So overall, when we look at kind of what drives cycling progress, the first step is consistency. And we have, we've done a presentation. I've done a presentation on this show where we talk kind of primarily about this core concept of consistency and how to get more consistent on the bike. The middle one that we're going to be talking about more today is this concept of progressive overload. So being consistent, applying this principle of progressive overload is what ultimately leads to cycling progress. So next slide, please. So understanding progressive overload. So let's jump into this just a little bit. And it's a pretty simple prospect, right? Progressive overload just simply means when it comes to the bike, you need to ride longer, you need to ride more frequently, ride more intensely, or ride more efficiently. Now, obviously, when we're breaking out kind of cycling performance, there's a lot of different areas of cycling performance that we could apply this principle of progressive overload to. So that could be your aerodynamic position on the bike, it could be your nutrition, it could be sleep and recovery habits. For this specific example, we're going to be talking about just training on the bike. So organizing a training plan on the bike. So next slide, please. So what does it look like? It's purposeful, it's systematic, and it's planned. And we're going to demonstrate exactly and give a specific example of how you might apply this principle of progressive overload to your training. So the next slide, please. So what this slide shows is it shows a list of different training elements or progressive elements that you might be choosing in your training plan. So there's a lot of different details here. Again, if you want to see this more in depth, you can check it out over at our website. But the general concept here is that wherever you are at in your training plan, whatever it is that you're focusing on, whatever stage you're at in your training plan, you want to make sure that there's this progressive element aspect of your training plan that you are planning and systematizing and tracking to assess your progress. So whether or not, it might be that in the earlier part of the year, it might be, the overall ride duration of an endurance ride. So it might be that you're kind of progressing from a 2-hour ride to a 3-hour ride to a 4-hour ride or whatever. So that might be your progressive element. Another one might be, another example might be a time and an aero position, right? So it might be that an aerodynamic position is really uncomfortable for you. And so your progressive element is that you want to expand and stretch the amount of time you can comfortably be in that position. So that's another example. So this list kind of just gives some basic ideas of different progressive elements that might be appropriate for a training plan. But if we head to the next slide, we're going to focus on one specific one to kind of break that out a little bit more in depth. So before we do that, though, when we talk about making progress, it's kind of one of the first steps we want to say is, well, where do we start, right? And the first point, and this kind of ties in with this concept of deliberate practice, is that you want to choose a starting point below what you think you can do. So oftentimes when cyclists are starting out, they say, hey, I know I can do a 2x20 interval workout at this level, and I'm going to start right there, and then I'm going to move up. And what research shows is that you're much more likely to have success if you start at a level below what you think you can do, and then you begin to work up progressively through that to push through your plateau and to push through boundaries. So the next thing is you want to keep it simple, right? So build one element. So, of course, you can train a lot of different things at many different times, but just like a good, science experiment, you want to, try and minimize the amount of variables that you have during your training at one time to be able to more accurately assess whether or not what you're doing is actually helping you get better. So try and keep it simple. Maybe build just one element into 2 workouts over 4 to 6 weeks. So you're looking at a 4 to 6 week block. You just have, you're choosing one element of that kind of progressive element list that we had, and then you're inserting that into 2 workouts, and then you want to assess your progress. So what does that look like when we look at it in a practical sense? So on the next slide, let's say our choice is going to be, we want our progressive element at this juncture in our training plan is going to be time at tempo without rest, right? So the amount of time we can spend at a tempo intensity without taking any rest. So maybe for you, pretty comfortably you can do 40 to 50 minutes. So maybe you want to start that progression at 35 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever. So below what you think you can do. And then you're going to work through that progression over the course of a 4 to 6 week training plan. And while you're doing that, you're constantly assessing, how that's going. Are you making progress? Are you able to achieve those kind of workout benchmarks as you move through the week? And then make adjustments as needed. Are you progressing too quickly to where, to where you're not able to hit those marks? Is it so easy that it's really not challenging you, and you need to kind of turn up the heat a little bit and kind of move the benchmark in terms of what's challenging you? So insert that progressive element into your training plan a couple times a week, and then assess and track your progress. Next slide, please. So we're going to come back to this original slide that we talked about in terms of life capacity. But when we talk about where to start, not only do we want to choose a point, choose an intensity or a progressive element that's below what we think we can do, but we also want to think about this concept of the minimal effective dose. And essentially what that is this overall kind of concept that you want to do the minimal amount of work that still drives progress. And if we head to the next slide, we can kind of talk about this with a little bit more accuracy. So if we move over to the other side of our graphic here, we can see that we have work, we have family that kind of combine into our life capacity. And then what we have left over is kind of what we have for training. Now, depending on kind of where your life capacity is really going to oftentimes drive this minimal effective dose. To where if your life capacity is all the way up and you're tapped out all the way kind of into this stress level, then the minimal effective dose or the place that you want to start in your training might be much less. You might want to turn that dial back into the green, because knowing that if you're maximizing your training intensity or duration or any of those elements of your training, that's likely going to lead to kind of burning out and overtraining. So we want to think about this concept. Oftentimes when people want to make progress, they want to jump into the deep end of the pool, into the hardest workouts right away. And I think that this is a mistake. It's much better to say, I want to turn down my intensity. I want to turn down, the duration, the volume of my rides, right to where I'm still making progress. And in the event that I'm not making progress and I'm plateauing, then I can kind of reassess this whole picture and say, do I need to turn up this minimal effective dose a little bit more to make progress? And you can kind of take into account this overall picture of work and family and create a much more sustainable training approach than one in which you're kind of hot and cold, jumping in as hard as you can to make progress without taking into account kind of what's going on with the rest of life. So next slide, please. So if we look at all these kind of together again, in order to make progress, you want to focus on this concept of deliberate practice, that having a systematized and progressive approach, a progressive overload approach to our training is what's really going to enable us to make progress over time. And then we want to choose a training element, a progressive training element that we're going to track and monitor. And we want to remember to utilize this concept of the MED, or the minimal effective dose, to make sure that we're only working as hard as we need to do to still make progress. That it's not necessary to work at 100% to maybe grab a tiny little, infinitesimal gain if we can work at 80% and get most of those benefits and still have a lot of room to grow as an athlete and to stay healthy in terms of our overall goals in life with our family and work. So that covers it with me. We're going to head to the last slide, which is a chance to ask any questions. If you have any questions specifically about making progress or anything else in training, I would love to cover them for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. I'll come back on the screen now and let your comments fly in Facebook or in Discord, or watch in both areas. Happy to address them. They can be related to the content, or they can be whatever's on your mind about cycling. If you have questions around how to change diapers, it's probably not the live stream ask. Haven't quite launched that one yet.
I could handle those too, though.
Oh, but Nate is qualified. Okay.
Yeah, very qualified.
Do you offer like services to perform diaper changing?
I don't. I'm.
No.
You know, we were just spending some time with some family, and I realized that if it's my kids' diapers, I can do that. But even one more removed, even if it's like a nephew, if it's a nephew's diaper, I'm not about that. It's got it stops at my kids. It's hard enough to get there. Yeah.
Okay, noted. Don't know how we got onto that, but Andy Jenner says, "Are we talking adult diapers or kid diapers?"
No, strictly kid diapers. Adult diapers, I'm not anywhere near those.
Okay, we do have. On that note, we've got a couple of questions. Hopefully they're not related to what we've been talking about. First one's a bit of a jokester. As you talk about time constraints, it seems to me it's taking too long to get to the point.
Sure.
Okay, obviously he's being silly there, but it's a good intro. I didn't feel like he deliberated too much myself. Okay, so Jurgen Leo Foley says, is it possible to jump from 280 watts to 350? And I assume he's asking about his FTP.
So is it possible? Sure, I would say yes. I would say that would be a pretty exceptional increase in your FTP. So if you're coming into the sport and you are a really, really, extraordinary athlete with a high VO2 max, maybe you've experienced a lot of success in other sports, and you're basically detrained and you're kind of brand new to the sport of cycling. That type of a jump is something that you could definitely see. I would say that's not typical. So to go from 280 to 350 isn't typical. I would say, with the exception of somebody who's brand new to the sport and they're kind of, they have yet to really train or to see any improvement. So possible, certainly possible. Not the most typical progression that most cyclists are going to see.
Okay, yeah. So if you want to add any more flavor for that, Jurgen, as to how long you've been in, go ahead and you can send a follow-up comment. We can come back to that in a little bit.
Sure.
Rob Moringa says, is there a particular element that makes the most sense to start following for improvement?
Hey, Rob. Yeah, Rob's going to be coming to our training camp here in the next couple of days in the Napa Valley. So be looking forward to linking up with him. So I would say it depends on what your goals are. I would say it depends on what your tolerance is for high intensity training and what your time constraints are. So there's been a lot of attention paid to, high intensity interval training of late. By large part, CrossFit is part of the same phenomenon in terms of, basically being a high intensity interval training type method. So if you're really short on time, then I would say high intensity interval training seems to be the most effective way to quickly increase your fitness. Now, the challenge with that is that it also comes with a pretty big mental cost for some people. So for some people, that kind of destroys their love of exercise. But then for others, research has shown that other people actually prefer it, and it actually feels like less effort to do a shorter high intensity workout than it does to, do a kind of muddling around in kind of a zone 2 type intensity. So I'd say, you want to look at your time constraints, what your overall goals are, and then kind of assess maybe what your personal history is with a tolerance to that type of exercise. But in general, if you're short on time, it's really tough to beat high intensity interval type training, whether or not those are threshold level intervals or, all the way down to kind of sprint interval type training. The differentiation between those would more line up with kind of what your goals are, what you're shooting for. But more intensity, if you have less time, is kind of the general rule that produces the best results.
Great answer. I do want to make one comment that if Nate's next answer begins with depends, we know he's still thinking about adult diapers.
Yeah, there you go. It could be. I thought I had flushed that image from my mind.
Sorry.
You brought it back.
Andy Jenner says, from athletes you have trained and hit a plateau, when they have pushed through the plateau, what sort of gains have they seen? Do you get jumps, or is it a gradual thing?
Yeah. So another good question, and I would refer back to Justin's. It depends. I think it depends in terms of how long that athlete has been training. So if you've been training really intensely for a long time, maybe you're a really seasoned athlete. It could be that pushing through that plateau is really small improvements, but those small improvements might be the difference between winning races. If it's somebody who's kind of just been muddling along in their training and they've plateaued, but their plateau is more an effective, really ineffective training, or they really haven't been training well at all, then it might be that they see big jumps in their training. So it depends on where you've been at, in terms of what kind of training you've been doing, in terms of what you can expect maybe to see when you kind of bust through those plateaus. But I would say if you've been sitting at a plateau for a while, it probably is more typical to see some gradual kind of increases through that plateau as opposed to large jumps through that plateau. I mean, that's kind of that's what everybody wants, right? You want to have this kind of dramatic, increase in your performance through a plateau. I would say that's less typical unless your training has been maybe really ineffective. Maybe your nutrition, maybe you're deficient in different key nutrients and, unless there's maybe kind of a tweak like that to your training, that might kind of give you a big burst. If you've been really good with your training for a long time, then I would say it's probably more realistic to expect kind of small increases in performance through that plateau.
Good. So yeah, so back to the guy who had asked about if he could go from 280 to 350. He did respond to saying he's been cycling for about 3 years. Now, I guess it kind of depends. My follow-up, I guess, just knowing the time probably isn't the full answer, right? I guess it kind of depends on what level of training, where you started, how far you've progressed. These are kind of things that will help you analyze if there's still big gains to be made, or if it's more fine-tuning, improvements. Which there's nothing wrong with fine-tuning improvements. I mean, but just more of what we should expect.
Yeah, and just to kind of give you an idea of the process that I go through and a lot of other coaches go through. So to answer that question, really what I would do is I would look at those 3 years of data. Preferably you have, power data from all those 3 years. So I would look at those 3 years. I would look at what you had done, what were the different types of, training, specific training strategies that you followed. What did your volume look like? How did you experiment with intensity, different types of intensities over that 3 years? What was your nutrition like to support those 3 years of training? And then, most coaches would look at that kind of history of data and they would see what you had done. And then together they would talk with you and they would say, this is probably what's realistic in terms of what to expect in terms of, your progress going forward. So you can do that yourself. Maybe you can look back at your data and you can say, or think critically about your training and say, hey, how committed was I to my training? How good was I at consistently getting workouts in? Did I have lots of kind of starts and stops, or was I consistent throughout that 3 years of my training? And that might help you kind of better answer that question in terms of what you might be able to expect going forward.
Yeah, and one thing the high level nugget that I usually think about in this regard is if we, like, the definition of crazy is trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So the converse of that is to make improvement or see gains you haven't seen, usually you got to switch it up and try something else. So
yeah,
exactly what Nate was talking about. Kind of look at what you've done previously and maybe identify holes in your training that were neglected that can be focused on and help improve.
Yeah, and it could be too that you think you were doing something that you weren't really doing. So it could be that when you look back through your data, you're like, hey, I was following this type of a training plan. And then you look back over a couple years of your data and you're like, I wasn't really doing that at all. Like I thought I was doing, maybe a lot of different threshold, but actually when I was going out on rides, I was just kind of soft pedaling for a lot of the ride and I wasn't really doing that. So sometimes even our own kind of recollection of what we've done doesn't match up to what the data says. And this is where it can be, really helpful. The more data you have to kind of look back over, the more helpful it can be to kind of see where you're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. He does have another follow-up question, kind of unrelated, but it says, what kind of watts would you need for a flat tri course to cycle about 56 minutes? 40 kilometers, 56 minutes. I would say look at this two ways. A, look at what you can hold. So knowing your power curve, you can have an estimate of what you should be holding for that course, what you're capable of doing. The other question is, maybe he's asking, what does it take to do a 40K in 56 minutes on a flat tri course?
Yeah. Well, I would say rather than kind of give you kind of an off the cuff number, if you're really interested in this is one thing that not to plug, Training Peak stuff, but their tool Best Bike Split basically answers this question that you're talking about. So you input different variables. So how much do you weigh? What is your aerodynamic position on the bike? What types of wheels are you riding? All these different, what is not just some hypothetical course, but what is the exact course that you're looking to study? And you can input in all those variables, and Best Bike Split will give you, the exact output. And so if you're really interested in kind of looking at what your goal is and then looking at kind of where you need to come up to improve that goal, I think that's a really good investment that essentially helps to solve the exact problem that you're asking right now. And that is, what do I need to do to hit this target goal? And that's the best tool out there to help you do that.
Completely agree on that one. Yep, absolutely. And then Andy dropped the link in there in the chat for him. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. So we do have about 1 minute remaining in the group ride. I'll probably start to wrap things up here. Thank everyone for the questions. It's been really great having you. We've had lots of good discussion. Nate, I always really appreciate your perspective. Definitely makes me look at things in a different way. I really like how you always keep the perspective of our life as a whole, right? A lot of times when talking about this topic, we can totally get pigeonholed into this is the only thing that matters in life. But that's not the reality. At least that's not the reality for 99.9% of us. I would venture to say that we don't have anyone on the live stream making their living off of cycling. So they have other constraints to feed their family and or themselves or whatever, right? And these are things we got to consider. So,
sure.
Great perspective. So, with that being said, we are here every Wednesday, 6:30 a.m. Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. We with the live stream, obviously, if you enjoy the content, hit like. We've got great content on the page daily, in addition to what we do here. So, hope to see you back. If you do have follow-up questions, you can send us an email offline. Let's say you're watching the recording, WUWP@teamodz.com. And also, we do have a forum. I didn't get the link up here. Maybe Andy can drop it in the comments. Discuss.endurancelab.fit is where we have follow-up conversations afterwards. Maybe you got a more in-depth question. You can ask it there, and we've got Nate's on the forum, I'm on the forum, our other presenters are as well, and we can help you get answers to your questions there. So with that, say thank you for joining, and we will catch you on the next episode.